Brachydios is one of the most beloved monsters in the entire series of Monster Hunter, and it's the first brute wyvern to become a flagship monster as well. In this video, we're going to take a look at its creation and what makes it such a blast. December 10th, 2011. This is the day I first played Monster Hunter for the first time with Monster Hunter 3G in Japan. It would be over a year, but it eventually got released in the West as Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate on March 19th, 2013. In Japan, Brachydios is on the cover because it's the flagship monster of the game, and for some really bizarre reason in the West, they went with Azure Rathalos on the cover. In a book that covers the creation of the flagship monsters, veterans Fujioka-san and creator of Brachydios as well as Monster Hunter World Director Yuya Tokuda recall its creation. Going into Monster Hunter 3G, they already knew that they wanted to feature a brute wyvern for the flagship monster because they've never done it before. Typically brute wyverns like Deviljho, Barroth, and Uragan, you'll notice that they have underdeveloped front legs, and they generally use their heads and tails to attack. They wanted something different, so from the outset they knew that the flagship monster should have highly developed front legs and use them as their main weapon. Standing on two back legs, they knew that they could have a monster that could do some rather fancy footwork and agile movements to put pressure on the hunters. After all, this was a G release, so hunters would be expecting the main monster to be really powerful. Internally, a nickname of Boxer was occasionally thrown around and given to the new monster. Here is the first initial concept art for the monster. Iterations continued for quite a while. Here we get a very small peek at the second iteration where they refined the silhouette to make it look cooler. But it was when they came up with the idea for the slime mechanic that it quickly turned from an idea on paper to a fully fleshed out monster in game. Fujioka-san recalled that the final piece of its physical design was its horn, and they were playing around with all sorts of ideas, but they ultimately landed on a single horn purely because it was his personal preference. They knew that the monster would punch and pivot around the hunter, so they were looking for a natural way to create obstacles that would restrict player movement and make the pivoting of the monster a stronger gameplay mechanic. And this is where the explosive slime idea came from. By punching the ground or hitting it with its horn, Brachydios would apply an explosive slime on the ground that the player had to avoid. If they touched it, they would get a new status ailment, first called Slime Blight in 3 Ultimate and Blast Blight in future games. If the player got hit, or after a period of time if they didn't evade a few times to get rid of it, a blast would occur that would deal a lot of damage and send them flying. The reason they made the slime glowing is that Brachydios' body is covered in shiny and hard black shells that contain obsidian, so they needed something that could stick out, especially in a volcanic environment. In fact, the obsidian part is part of the monster's name. Brachydios, or Bracchydios in Japanese, comes from the words brachium, which means arm in Latin, and the word obsidian. Other candidate names that they were thrown around was Brachiodosu, Bracchydios, and even a motif to Gojira as Brachydios. Ultimately though, I'm happy that they went with Brachydios, it's super cool. Andrew Alfonso, the localization director at Capcom, recalled in a localization blog that the name worked really good in English as well, so all they did was tweak the spelling so that it can be pronounced right in the West. The slime is a huge part of the monster's design. To create a gameplay rhythm, they made it so that Brachy would run out of slime and eventually need to lick its pounders to create more, or it just becomes super explosive when it became enraged. The science behind it all is that it works the same ways that slime molds do. When they burst and distribute their spores into the air, they explode. This is due to a chemical reaction caused by Brachydios' saliva, which makes the process occur really fast. In a way, it's kind of a symbiotic relationship, as Brachy uses the slime to create blasts, and in the process the slime gets to send off spores. In Japan, they released a book for the 10th anniversary of the series in which they invited researchers and scientists to reflect on the monsters and the mechanics in it. Hokkaido University Museum professor Yoshitsugu Kobayashi theorized in the book that the slime is more like a parasite at first, and that younger Brachydioses that were weak would likely die from the explosions that occurred. So the Brachydioses that we see in the game are ones that were strong enough to overcome that destructive relationship and grew into being able to utilize the slime to its advantage. One really neat detail is how the hard skin of the Brachydios has details in it, and this is from being carved and molded because when the slime explodes, it makes the skin around it very hot and moldable. How awesome is that? In the interview, they playfully recall how Tokuda-san likes to play longsword a lot, so he really enjoyed the rhythm of moving and hitting, but it was really hard for Fujioka-san, who is a lance user, because you had to wait for Brachydios to come to you, but then it would pivot, it would cause explosions, it was just really hard to handle. This really brought back a lot of memories because I had started as a Lance player myself, and it was not until the G1 Urgent in 3 Ultimate against 2 Brachydios that I hit a really hard wall, and it forced me to try another weapon. This eventually led to me loving the sword and shield, and then going on to learn all the other weapons, then blogging about it all, and then starting a YouTube channel. So in a way, I can kinda thank Brachydios for the entire channel of Gaijin Hunter. Thanks, Bracky. They did admit in the interview that there were some unfair moves the monster would do against weapons that were slow. For example, the head in the ground and explosion was meant to be a small break for the players, but ended up being really hard to manage for the slower weapons, so they rebalanced the monster in the next game, Monster Hunter 4. The weapons and gear for Brachydios is awesome. The weapons have the element Blast, which will cause explosions as you hit a monster, making it easy to trip, break parts, and generally just do extra damage, and it's a fine type of weapon to pretty much bring to any type of hunt. Here is some concept art for the armor, and the skills that it normally has is stuff like Challenger, which makes you more powerful when the monster you're facing is enraged, and Bombardier, which will increase your blast element. I actually have an old video where I go into good detail about the blast element, and it's a great reminder how Bracky not only helped me overcome using one weapon in the game, but also helped me overcome being nervous and talking. That video gave me some very early practice in learning how to speak into a microphone, and while the performance is really bad, and I still have a lot of room to grow, I can look back on it and feel pretty proud of how far I've come.
After a short period of time, you would blow up and take damage. Or if you got hit at any time that you had Slime Blight, you'd blow up as well.
Brachydios has a special variant called the Raging Brachydios, which I might cover in a separate video one day, but I've been keeping these features really just about the core monster. All in all, Brachydios is a fabulous monster, and they already have the skeleton it needs to work with incorporated in other monsters in Monster Hunter World, so I hope we can see it return for Iceborne. Let me know down below what your favorite memories of this monster is. Is it the insanely tough quest from Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate called Clashing Fists? Is it the fact that the Guild Marm in Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate was romantically in love with the Brachydios? Or is it the really funny and cool way that it's been incorporated into other games like Monster Hunter Stories? Or is it something else completely? There's so much more I could have covered, but I wanted to focus on its design and introduce the monster to you. Let me know down in the comments below, I'd love to hear what you have to say. Thanks for watching this video, and until next time, happy hunting.